especially, are woefully unprepared for where we are in the current age.
There's really no substitute for deep engagement with the world of ideas and history. The literacy rate in founding America, it was the most learned republic in its infancy in the history of the world.
Do you think we're learning the lessons that we should be learning?
I think the general public still does not appreciate the extent to which the modern federal government is not really run by the president. Have we had our crossing of the Rubicon? The question is, how do you fix the more corrupt parts or the things that are standing in your way?
I mean, there's a lot of people that just blackpill.
What do the kids say? It turns out you can just do things.
Welcome back to the MakeReady Podcast. My name is Brian Sims, and today I'm joined by Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute and a leading voice in the effort to restore America's founding ideals. In this episode, we explore why being well-read still matters, how the moment we're living in is inseparable from the past, and why there's no substitute for deep, sustained engagement with the world of ideas. These are interesting times, and to make sense of them, we have to know where we've come from. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. This is the MakeReady Podcast. Ryan Williams, welcome to the MakeReady Podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. Give me your background. I mean, I've gotten to know you not from a professional perspective, but kind of a friend perspective.
Yeah.
And then I Googled you, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you've done some things. You're part of a lot of really cool things that are happening.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Southern California in San Diego, born in LA, but we moved when I was young. And so love that state, but now we've left it, like so many have.
As refugees.
Yeah. For, my line about California is it's a beautiful place. I mean, what's not to like, but it's run by fanatics and ideologues, and it's prohibitively expensive and very hard place to raise a family. So, but I went to Hillsdale College right when Larry Arnn became president there in 2000. And his previous job was running the Claremont Institute, which I now run and have for the last 7.5 years. Although I've worked there in some fashion for going on 20 years in August. But I went to Hillsdale. My folks had moved to Jacksonville when I was in college. So I spent a year there figuring out what I wanted to do, law school, graduate school, typical, very high, one very high earning, maybe. Actually,
depending on how you do it.
The secret is that the median lawyer's income in America is like $47,000. So unless you're going to be really good at it, you think twice.
Wait till AI really hits that market.
No, that's true. It's coming for them. And then decided to go to graduate school at this place called Claremont Graduate University, which for many years was Claremont Graduate School. And that is where a great teacher named Harry Jaffa, and before that, for a few years, just visiting Leo Strauss taught. So it's on the eastern edge of Los Angeles County. It was not a well-known or highly credentialed graduate school, but it always had this wonderful faculty, especially for those of us who wanted to study great books, political philosophy and American government, and had a wonderful faculty for that. They still do borrow some professors from Claremont McKenna College, which is an undergrad right near it. Anyway, Harry Jaffa was there, a great Lincoln scholar and scholar of the American founding, and himself a student of Leo Strauss back from mid-century. And he had his first generation of graduate students, a few of them decided to start the Claremont Institute. They didn't want to go disappear into the academy. That was 1979, and we're now 45 plus years later, and I have the honor of being the 6th president of the Claremont Institute. So But I originally went out there for graduate school after doing one of the Claremont Institute's fellowships right after college. That was my introduction. I'd read the magazine. We published the Claremont Review books, this big quarterly.
Oh yeah, got it in my office.
Yeah. And that was floating around Hillsdale because a lot of the faculty at Hillsdale in the politics program back then, and even more so now, a lot of them were PhDs from Claremont. And so the Institute's position there was just an accident of history. And we still have a home office there, but we've expanded here to Texas, and we have a DC office too. So that's sort of my story in
Did
brief.
it start as the Claremont Review of Books?
No, it started as Public Research Syndicated, which was its brief life, I think, in early 79. Don't quote me on it, but they wanted to place, they were inspired by the example of Publius, the nom de plume of the Federalist Papers. So they wanted to write and place articles in the public press around the country, syndicated style, to try to convince their fellow citizens of the virtues of the founding and how to restore the principles of the founding. And then it quickly morphed into a proper 501c3. And, in the early days, I'm not speaking out of school because the founders of it, like Larry Arnn and Chris Flannery, will say this. They didn't know what the hell they were doing. They didn't know how to run a think tank. It's like it was a very hand-to-mouth business for 15 years. But now we're luckily, with the support of donors and especially a huge support of our chairman now for almost 15 years, Tom Klingenstein, we're in a pretty healthy position.
I met Tom Klingenstein.
You have met Tom.
Yeah,
that's right.
I did. Yeah. Went to his Maine residence. Yeah. Man, that was fun.
Yeah.
He's a good dude.
Yeah, splits his time between the Upper West Side and Maine. It's not too rough.
Yeah, it's same. Yeah. So, where did you get your love for education and the classics and learning? And
yeah, a lot of it, like a lot of these things, I think a lot of it we have no control over. It's just sort of nature. But I grew up in a pretty bookish household and a pretty political household, sort of libertarian in flavor for a long time, and a tradition going back to my paternal grandparents, who were early backers of sort of Friedman and Cato and all this sort of stuff. And so grew up with ideas, reading about economics and history and being interested in that. And then went to Hillsdale really for their economics program, which was much more than any other place, less quantitative, although you could get that if you wanted to, but had a lot of history of economic thought. The Austrian school was very prevalent there. But then ended up falling in love also with the politics faculty there, many of whom were educated in Claremont. And so, and also Hillsdale, whatever major you pick, and it's gotten even more robust since then. But even back then, the first 2 years were pretty much a core curriculum for everybody. And it was, in the traditional sense, you had to take biology and some other science, you took economics, but you took a course in Western literature that started with the Old Testament and ran through sort of modern American realism and European realism, and so the place was unique in that sense, especially, well, less so back then, although it was still unique back then, but even more so now, where everyone has to study the Western canon for 2 years, and it was a place founded by Free Will Baptists. It's now about 35% Catholic, I hear from the president.
Is it really?
Yeah. So it's part of this general trend of a return to orthodoxy. It's happened at Hillsdale too.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah.
I've noticed that.
And so, you'd meet people from regional schools like Grand Valley State or Michigan State or whatever, and they'd be complaining about their 1 7-page term paper, and we'd be like, "You guys are
what are you talking about?
We write 2 of those,
Crimea River,
2 of those in every 2 weeks, So it was a very bookish place. So it was a great environment for that.
Well, so one of the thesis of what we're doing here at Make Ready is the idea that men, especially, are woefully unprepared for where we are in the current age. And I think part of that, and I'd put myself in the category, is we're just uneducated. Mm-hmm. We don't read. We don't, and reading is just exploring the history of where we come from. And like Ron said in previous podcasts, if you don't know the road, how are you going to drive the car?
Yeah.
Do you run into that a lot? I mean, I know you're around a lot of educated guys all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I taught a little bit in my graduate school days in the Cal State system. And the trend was bad then. That is to say, most of the students could barely write, and it's just gotten worse. And now with large language models, it's like a crisis, because how do you get anyone to actually work and read when they can basically ask a computer to help them work? But they don't have to read, and it helps them write anything that they have to write. It's a real problem. So, but there's really no substitute for deep engagement with the world of ideas and history. And I give a little talk at the end we have a bunch of summer fellowship programs for all the way from early career people in media, politics, and law up through mid-career and even sheriffs now, which is a lot of fun.
I saw that. That's super cool.
Yeah. But my spiel at the end of a couple of them is, what should you all go out and do? Well, don't despair, first of all. Times are hard, but if you're a student of history, it can always get a lot worse. And
I
it's
struggle
pretty
with
darn good in America, even now, even in this degraded state we're in. But you should, the thing that you need to do, that you need to acquire to do well in the world is experience. Mm-hmm. And if you're young, you don't have it yet. But a nice facsimile for it is reading of great books of history, and especially great books of biography. So to sort of study the experience of the past and men of the past, and to glean what you can from that, and so you can have a little bit of a cheat code as you make your way in life.
It's your fast track to experience.
Yeah,
it's your shortcut in a way. Another thing that Ron says is it's history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Gosh, I see that so often.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, a good series to read right now would be Gibbon's Rise, Fall, and Decline of the Roman Empire, which was, like us, a former republic. Although I don't mean to say we're a former republic, but we're sliding in that direction.
Very close.
Which became an empire and overextended itself abroad and had a continued corrupted ruling class and kind of slid into oligarchy. It became sort of sexually licentious and it lost its way. It started as an armed camp and a sort of really tough republic, in it over the course of many centuries sort of turned into something else and then was conquered. At least the western half of it was conquered through bad immigration policy, if we can be a little glib about it.
What? Where have you heard that before?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, where do you think we are in that path? I mean, is there a real specific time in the Roman Empire that you can point to and say, hey, we're pretty much there at this point, this inflection point? Because it feels like an inflection point.
Yeah.
And by an inflection point, there's probably a 20 to 50 year pivot. Mm-hmm. It's not like a day that's an inflection point, although that does happen in history.
Yeah. Well, our case is different, of course, because we're in different times. But have we had our crossing of the Rubicon? Mm-hmm. I think institutionally and constitutionally, it was the New Deal and FDR in many ways. But we also have this ideological element to it where we had the rise of a different understanding of modern government that came. It was in in its infancy, both ideologically and politically, at the late 19th century. I mean, the Civil War cannot be I know you and Ron had talked about it a little bit, but it really, as World War I did for Europe, the Civil War shook the moral foundations of America, the bloodshed and just the gravity of it all. And it led to a reassessment of how we ought to do government, which was influenced by new notions of the modern state coming out of Germany and the continent. And that influenced American progressivism and even American republicanism, big R republicanism. And so beginning in the early 20th century politically and really reaching a kind of big inflection point at the New Deal, it was no longer a constitutional republic with a strict separation of powers and a robust federalism. What we began to see was the nationalization of our politics and the desire for a new class of bureaucrat that could just do scientific social science and really bring heaven on earth if only they were freed from the parochial interests of some hick congressman from the backwoods of Kentucky or whatever, or the western states or wherever. We needed to free government and good policy making from its tether to the people. Now, to understand them as they understood themselves, they didn't think this was a problem because they thought we had overcome the old problems of tyranny. So if you just got the managers in control and let them do scientific policy, you really would have prosperity, increasing prosperity and human flourishing. But of course, the insight of the American founders, which goes back all the way to ancient Greece and ancient Athens, Jerusalem, Rome, was no, human nature is, we do progress as a civilization. We certainly make strides, technology changes, but the fundamental thing, human nature, with its virtues and vices, the temptations of power, money, the corruption of all those things, that doesn't really change. And so you can't really have neutral scientific bureaucrats just doing the public good. They become their own interest. And the latest sort of revelations coming out of what the federal government has been funding through USAID abroad and domestically and all the rest is a good example. I mean, the modern state is kind of left of center ideologically as a matter of an accident of history, and it's leaning ideologically, and it's basically been funding itself and aggregating power to itself and colonizing the American constitutional system now for the better part of a century. So the question now for us, and it's a lot of the work we do, is how do you understand that? How do we get here, and how do you undo it?
Well, you touched on, I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding or difference in how you see the nature of man. Because if you see man is just fundamentally good. And if we just remove the external influences that are corrupting men, then it'd be awesome.
Yeah.
You see how they get there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But
if that's the core difference, there's not going to be some consensus.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. We've some of the scholars associated with the Institute, now dearly departed, some of them like Angelo Codavilla and others, have written about us being for a long time now in a kind of cold civil war. And it's really a war. My colleague Charles Kessler has a big book about this, a war between two constitutions. Now, those two constitutions have undergone some evolution over the last century, but it's this huge divergence between the purpose of government, but really more fundamentally what human beings are, as you just indicated, what drives human beings, what is the purpose of government. Now we're even arguing over maybe it's really only an 80-20 issue. So there's more reason to be optimistic than not, but what men and women are, what biology is. So when you have that deep a rift, you're going to have our national political scene right now, which is, we're not only talking past each other, we just have very different visions of the good and what government ought to do, what justice is, and what human flourishing is, and what the good life is.
What do you think the resolution is?
Well, traditionally in American politics, we've been in this weird situation now in the post-Cold War era. The normal course of American political history was a dominance of the national apparatus by one party or another. So I talked about the New Deal. When Gingrich took back the House, or helped orchestrate taking back the House in 1994, Congress had been, or at least the House had been controlled by Democrats for 60 plus years. And so you had this trading of power between two major parties where one of them would dominate the national government and sort of reorient or put its imprint on the national political conversation. But in the post-Cold War era, we've just been trading and gridlocked. Mm-hmm. And I think it has a lot to do with the rise of this big fourth branch of government, which is the administrative state or the bureaucracy. And in many ways, although different ways, Congress is kind of a client of it. All the constituencies of the national political parties are clients of the administrative state, or pieces of those coalitions are clients of the administrative state. And so with this increasing centralization of government, and Tocqueville wrote about this in the early 20th century, this problem, you have this crowding out of more traditional institutions in American government. And so you have this big thing that has what seems like unlimited money to dole out and to purchase its clients and to keep them mollified. And so how do you break that? I think one solution would be one of these two parties or some third version that takes over the other. Our system is geared towards really having two parties. So it wouldn't be a third party, or if it was, it would be a third party that would displace one of the other two parties, would make a new argument for justice and the common good that would win a durable majority over a generation or two and reorient the political landscape. You've seen flourishes of this even in the, maybe not the post-Cold War era, but Reagan reoriented American politics in many ways. Look at the way Obama talks about modern liberalism. It's very much influenced. He wanted to be the Reagan for the left and shift the ground again. I think he succeeded in mostly pernicious ways. I think a lot of our modern racialized politics are due to Obama's nefarious influence. which is a weird thing to say for the first black president of the United States. But
sad thing to say.
It is what it is.
I mean, do you think the Tea Party was that in a way without a leader?
Yeah, sure. You have these. The Tea Party was the precursor to the MAGA revolution. I mean, it cropped up, and it was kind of assimilated by and grass-topped and taken over and manipulated by a good portion of the Republican establishment. But then Trump came along, and a lot of those Tea Partiers, who were loyal Republicans, I think, for a lot of that time, jumped on board. But then he's also expanded the coalition into a large swath of the middle and working class that has decided, rightly so, I think, that the Democratic Party, for whatever its roots, in the middle of the 20th century as the worker in the Union Party, is now really the party of cosmopolitanism and managerialism. And so they don't find much to identify with in that. And then it's gone really starting in, I'll channel my friend James Poulos and say this, that really once the smartphone came on the scene and it melded with liberalism and we got kind of insane wokeness. So the weird, the weird identity politics of higher education campuses from the 90s sort of spread into all of political life. And so this part of the new coalition that Trump has tapped into are a bunch of people who, from sort of a common sense perspective, say, I'm sorry, what? Men get to go in our daughters' bathrooms. There are 37 genders now. I'm sorry, I can't sign up for this. Or the other just normal, it's a story as old as politics, which is that other party seems to make my life more difficult to lead. It makes it more difficult and more expensive for me to raise my family, so I'm going to try the other one.
Do you think this coalition that's found itself underneath MAGA and Trump is durable?
We'll see. I think it's being made more durable by the week as we see the left kind of flail around with some attempt to recapture the middle of the country, and so far with a lot of failure. I think the enterprising politicians on the left, and you see them cropping up in Congress and in some governorships, are even Gavin Newsom. Turned a whole new page. He's now
I saw his podcast.
He's now the radical centrist Newsom.
Where he kind of unbuttons his shirt a little bit. He's casual.
Yeah. A very dangerous man in American politics. Gavin Newsom.
His hair's not slicked back. It's a little bit more matted. He's one of the people. What about?
Yeah, they're trying to find a middle way where they kind of cordon off at the very least their left wing, whether it's on issues of identity politics, but also now, the right's been handed a great new opportunity after October 7th in Israel, and it was latent on campus, this anti-Semitism that has been exacerbated by the importation of a lot of students from the Arab world and North Africa and elsewhere, where they have very different ideas about government and American identity and all the rest. That sort of has gone crazy since October 7th. So it's made the left's challenge more difficult. Although a lot of those currents have been there since the 90s, at least.
Well, it's true. Yeah. I mean, that's a 50-year project in academia. Yeah. Do you? What has surprised you the most that has developed over the past few years? I mean, take it back to when you were in school, learning politics. Like, you would just never have imagined the scenario that we find ourselves in.
Donald Trump getting elected to 2 non-consecutive terms of office. Yeah, I mean,
what a time to be alive.
Yeah. My friend and colleague, and he's currently at the State Department. We were just talking about him, but now a new Texan, not as new as me, but a few years now. Mike Anton wrote this essay in September of 2016, the Flight 93 election, and one of the points that people miss in that, the left and the center thought he was nuts. So some of them have come around. But he said, look, I mean, the idea that Donald Trump is our salvation, political salvation, is a sign of a corrupt republic. I mean, only in these weird times can this complete outsider who's built his own constituency mostly on reality TV fame and then all of his exploits before that with the sort of brash billionaire real estate guy and Trump steaks and the cool plane, the gold toilets, whatever. He had sort of cultivated his own following, and then he accelerated it with this political movement, stealing a slogan from Ronald Reagan, "Make America Great Again." And but the idea, I mean, he's only the second president in American history to have really no political experience outside of the presidency. The other being generals. So Eisenhower, well, I guess three, Eisenhower and Grant. I think, did Grant have any political experience? Maybe not.
I don't think so.
But yeah, the other two were generals. They weren't, but it's a sign of the times. I mean, our modern mass culture is dominated by television, or was now dominated by social media, a little bit of TV now too. So that was sort of the meal ticket he rode to popularity. But he did, as Mike pointed out, he ran on a set of policy issues that a substantial portion of the Republican base had wanted something done about for a long time and had been kind of ignored. That is immigration, a trade policy that focused on the middle class rather than the financial class, and a foreign policy that was retethered to a realistic assessment of American interest and wasn't committed to going abroad to do democracy projects and really a weird kind of American-style imperialism that is a cultural and moral imperialism, which has gotten increasingly left-wing. So, the old imperialism was for land or whatever. The new imperialism, especially after the Cold War, issuing out of a lot of non-governmental organizations and structures that were meant to be in opposition to the Soviet Union, have kind of gotten repurposed to spread, as I think I've put in print somewhere years ago, spread the rainbow flag from Krakow to Kabul. That seems to be the State Department's mission, and a lot of this NGO infrastructure that was funded by USAID, and you hear weird, all these weird details, like why are we spending $200,000 a year on lesbian puppet shows in Nicaragua?
Oh, it's mind blowing. Yeah. It's mind blowing. And how much do you think of Trump being elected was a rejection of something, as opposed to an affirmation of something?
Yeah, I think especially the 2016 election was substantially a phenomenon of people going, oh, well, he's against all these people that I hate.
Which means I'm for him.
I'm for that guy. Yeah. And that has evolved since, of course, including, a failed presidential run as an incumbent. And I think, in many ways, and I think even Trump has signaled that he agrees with this, it was kind of maybe providential that he lost in 2020, because in a way he has another first term, although he can't get reelected. He had 4 years in the wilderness, and the loyal section of his party had time to grow, bat ideas around, build more infrastructure, and figure out who was actually committed to the project and who wasn't. So the personnel apparatus is much more in tune now with the president's wishes and the wishes of his base. And so I think he's set up for a lot more success than he was.
Are you thanking Joe Biden right now? Is that what you're doing?
I think you've seen the meme. It was probably in one of our group chats of, they have the president's placemats, and
What group chats? What are you talking about? Yeah.
There are no group chats. First rule of group chats: don't talk about group chats. But there's the presidential placemat where you can get it for your toddler. It has all the presidents, and it goes up and hits Joe Biden, and it has a bunch of like black silhouetted staffers.
Yes.
As a stand-in for the portrait. We're still reckoning with that. I mean, it's the biggest political scandal in the post-war era.
Do you think we're on the precipice of that history being written, or do you think that's gonna the actual history of what happened is for the future to write?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because so much of it was domestic and just internal decision making, I think a lot of it will come out a lot more quickly than it would be. I mean, this foreign policy side will remain a little more obscured, but I think the core truth of it, which is that we had a caretaker presidency and a cabal of people inside it running it instead of the actual president. I forget who put it this way first, but it was a good analogy. I mean, Biden sat on the board, but he was kind of chairman, but he was part of a coalition.
Yeah, it was honorary chairman.
The buck did not stop with him, it looks like, in many ways. I think the details of that and how it impacted domestic policy, and there are going to be a lot of FOIAs, and there already are, and lawsuits, I think, about auto pen stuff and pardons and all the rest. I think that history is already being started to be written.
Do you think we're learning the lessons that we should be learning?
That's a good question. I think the general public still does not appreciate the extent to which the modern federal government is not really run by the president or his cabinet even. Most of it is really run by the deep state is a loaded term. So, but the permanent Washington class of folks, and that extends to Congress too. There's a lot of permanent staff in Congress as well, and they're Congress, my colleague John Marini has been a student of this for a long time. And he said in the 70s and 80s that with the rise of the administrative state, Congress ceased to be a really deliberative legislative body and became the ombudsman for the administrative state. And so it has lost, in many ways, the ability to appropriate, that is, hold the executive and the administrative state accountable through funding, because it doesn't really. It used to authorize individual spending bills for departments, so you could really drag a department head in and put the fear of God into them, because that committee
take their money away.
Controlled their budget.
Yeah.
Now we haven't really done that in 30 years. What we do is wait till the last minute and then pass this massive bill that no one has time to read, because they've got 24 hours to sift through 11,000 pages or even 3,000 pages, right?
Yeah.
Take this crisp, shorter version, 1,500 pages. And so that's how modern government works. So Congress needs to rediscover its ability of oversight and funding. But its incentives for decades now are not in that direction, because Congress has loved. Incumbency rates are high. Why? Well, because basically Congress every 2 years in the House and every 6 in the Senate, their constituent services, it's not, look, I would love to help you. And I can a little bit, but it's really, it's the bureaucracy. It's the executive branch. And then presidents run on fixing it. And especially Republican presidents, they arrive in Washington, and it was most dramatic with Trump because he was an outsider. And they discover there's this vast apparatus that just moves without them. It will ignore their direct orders or slow walk things, and it's remarkably hard to get your hands around. And so when the people can't elect a national president and then exercise some political control through him of the apparatus of the state, we are in a real problem. And I think people are beginning to understand that has been a 30-year process. The Gingrich Revolution, even the Reagan Revolution, was in part a response to this. And I think Trump, I like to call him the great unmasker, because his unconventionality and his weird rise to power and its sort of unprecedentedness led the institutions of the permanent class in Washington and its personnel to freak out and do things, sort of reveal their hand too quickly and pull the mask off too quickly. And I think people observed that and they said, what is this thing? So I think the pain that was the first Trump administration and then now some in the second is beginning to reveal to people the depth of the problem. How do you fix it? Well, there are a lot of smart people. I'm proud to say many of them have gone through Claremont fellowships.
I was going to say, you're one of those smart people.
Serving in this government and outside, trying to talk about the problem and educate people on it. And we'll see. American constitutionalism is not dead, despite what you hear across even many corners of the right. We still have a pretty robust system of separate. People are going to laugh when I say this, but it's this one example. One of our friends and former fellows who worked in the first Trump administration likes to give the example of, look, things are bad in America, but look, even our federal courts, even after this sort of orgy of universal injunctions frustrating presidential power, our federal courts, if you look across the Western world and especially the rest of the world, are pretty sound and uncorrupt. Bribery is not that prevalent. You can still get your day in court. It may cost you too much and take you too long, but there are a lot of institutions in the American system that are still pretty robust and responsible. And so the question is, how do you fix the more corrupt parts or the things that are standing in your way?
There's a lot of people that just blackpilled on the whole thing and said, well, I can't do anything about it. Right. And I can just hear so many guys going like, okay, Mr. Think Tank man, I'm a normie, and I don't mean that in a pejorative, but the average guy out there who's trying to lead his family well, that's going to church, that's trying to be an upstanding citizen and in business. I hear what you're saying, and I'm like, yes, but I'm never going to be that educated guy. Uh-huh. I'm never going to know the nuances of all these things, but I need some level of understanding of what's going on. How do I do that?
Yeah. Email me and I'll send you a reading list.
There's a thing called the Claremont Institute.
No, there are, and not just, of course, not just us. My alma mater has done a great service. If you want the sort of highly produced lecture version of how to understand a lot of these things, go to hillsdale.edu. They've got videos on all sorts of stuff, from how to read the Old Testament to how to understand modern American government. What is the administrative state?
They're great.
How do we get here?
Those are fantastic.
So there's and also with the collapse of the legitimacy of the traditional media and the rise of YouTube and podcasting and all that, the resources out there for understanding this stuff are endless. The challenge now is, how do you triage this flood of information and find the good stuff? And so,
because I think that's intentional. Like, I think the flood of information is intentional by certain people to confuse and to they're not going to be able to handle this, and so they won't know the truth.
Yeah. And I would, a good place to start, another good place, on the sort of paper syllabus side, is there's a lot of model curricula coming out of places like Hillsdale. We run a website that we're in the process of redoing called founding.com, which has a lot of resources. So they're out there. And, you don't need to be, have some advanced degree to understand the run of Western civilization. There are great books out there that are pretty accessible that you can read and digest. I would encourage everyone to do everything they can wherever they see the opportunity to become more involved, especially at the local level, through their churches, through local civic institutions. And you'll be surprised if you educate yourself through some of these modes that we're talking about. It's not that hard to become an authoritative and trusted voice in those communities, because as you said, most people don't have time. They're just trying to raise their families, and they had, especially in this day and age, for folks under 50, had a pretty poor civic education in high school and college. So it's time to go back to school in a way.
Well, especially as a young person.
Yeah,
like, you have the time. A buddy of mine went to one of the local precinct chapter meetings after an election, and for the Republicans, and he shows up, and he's the youngest by like 35 years. Mm-hmm. And all the sweet old ladies, Republican ladies, look at him and go like, "Oh my gosh, we're going to elect you to go to the and all of a sudden he's like at the national convention because he just showed up and was young and said, "Hey, I care." Mm-hmm. It's not that he knew all of the nuances of what was going on.
Yeah. What do the kids say? It turns out you can just do things. But part of our pitch in this conversation is to do them well, you should quickly stock up or restock your intellectual capital and try to understand the currents of history, how regimes work, what politics is for, the missteps of former forms of government, that sort of thing. So,
well, that should never end. That education should never end.
Yeah. And, you'd be... I fall prey to this too. Just you get busy with the day job, but with young kids it's a little harder. But you can always carve out an hour of a day at some point to do some reading, whether it's at 4:30 in the morning before the kids wake up, or if you're a night owl like me, once they're asleep for an hour and a half. You do that 3 or 4 days a week, and you're on your way to like a piece of an undergraduate education every year. Just do it consistently and make it a real course of study. And I've found that the more broadly you read of worthwhile stuff to read, and it can be fiction, literature, just try to stick to the good stuff, and there's lots of guides out there to find the good stuff, it will enhance the rest of your life, no matter what you do for a living. I mean, it will make you a more engaged and intelligent citizen, and that's what this place was built on.
Yeah. And the more you practice, the better you get at it. Yeah,
I mean, the weird thing about America, I mean, it was a miracle in many ways, the founding. I mean, the founding generation, the literacy rate in founding America, they might have just been reading the Bible and some Shakespeare, but, it was the most learned republic in its infancy in the history of the world. On sort of a broad basis.
I've never heard that before. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. We've always been a bookish people, at least in the sense that literacy rate was, 80, 85, 90%. Now we've dropped from that, unfortunately, and it's part of the problem of our times. But, that's a first step on the road back to small R republicanism is an educated citizenry. And, it's a tall order because we've had a pretty corrupt educational system since. I would encourage everyone to despite the attractiveness of the places that will give your smart children the proper credentials to wealth and fame, resist. a plug. I'm biased, of course, because I went there, but I mean, the best liberal arts education in the country right now, I think, is at Hillsdale College.
I've heard that from several people.
And there are other great places too.
But they're all grads from there. So,
right.
Yeah.
We're preaching to our own choir. Yeah. But there are other places too. I mean, University of Dallas, another great example right here close to us. They're out there, but just resist the temptation to get the credential. Now, that said, sometimes credentials matter. And if you are successful in inoculating your children by educating them well in elementary school and high school against some of the intellectual currents that they'll encounter, they can manage, they can navigate their way through some higher ed institutions that are otherwise corrupt. And there are still good professors at a lot of these places, but you've got to be very intentional about it. And so you need to educate yourself on the faculties of these places, figure out what your child might want to study, and figure out if there's some good professors they could gravitate towards there that would help be a kind of create a little walled garden inside the institution, so they can walk away with a good degree that will help them succeed, but they won't be corrupted in the meantime.
Are there good roadmaps for that?
Yeah, there's, ISI used to do this guide to colleges, but they haven't done a new one in a while, unfortunately.
It'd be hard because I imagine a lot of the conservative, like really, Christian professors and would be kind of underground in a lot of these places.
Yeah. No, I think we're overdue for a new guide. Start with ISI, even though it's 10 years old. I think it's still a decent big book, but it needs some updating. And I bet with a little Chat GPT help, Grok is fine, whatever. Use them all, use them against each other. They're powerful research tools for precisely this sort of thing. The LLMs have basically replaced Google for me, I know. And you gotta, they do hallucinate and throw up fake info. So you've got to be
you got to be sharp. That's why you have to be well read. You have to you have to take responsibility for the things that you intake.
Mm-hmm. But they're out there. And you also, you could, it's a lot of work, but if you get your prospective college student down to their short list of colleges and try to throw in there the ones that are solid, but then with the other ones, just sort of take a perusal of what they might be interested in by subject matter and look at the faculty pages. The nice thing about the Great Awakening is most of the intellectually corrupt, a lot of them naive, so I don't mean to run them all down, professors sort of display it on their chest, on their curriculum vitae, on
they got all the pronouns
faculty
on there.
pages.
Yeah.
If their main studies are, ethnic and diversity and feminist studies, stay away. If you get what looks to be an old school professor type who writes sensible books, that's probably a decent guide.
Are a lot of these universities running these guys off?
Yeah.
Are we done with that stage?
Although I will say there's been a real renaissance in the last 5 to 6 years of conservative philanthropic money to create centers within other bigger colleges. So they all have their different problems, but at a lot of state schools, the legislatures have required it. So there's the Hamilton Center at the University of Florida. There's a place at the University of North Carolina. There's one at the University of Texas. None of them are perfect, but they are, in their various different ways, they try to be oases of pro-Western civilization, great books focused, non-ideological, how do I put this? They want to take the Western canon seriously and read it as if it might be true and have something to teach us, rather than just a bunch of old white guys' books that we study because we need to understand how we've progressed so much more and are so much better than they are.
Well, that goes back to what we were saying about human nature. Like, do they have a correct view of human nature?
Right.
Or is it a perfection project?
Mm-hmm. And look at the college's missions too. Mm. You want to find a college that has a good mission and takes it seriously. And that will help whittle down your colleges quite quickly.
So what's Ryan Williams' list of great books to start with?
Yeah.
If classics, I'm just not that guy. And I think there's a lot of them out there. Mm-hmm. But I want to be knowledgeable. I want to start. Where do I start?
the Bible, of course.
But that's a freebie. Okay.
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Especially on this podcast. Yeah, it goes without saying. We were talking about it at lunch before this, but there's a certain school called Straussianism, which is an approach to great books. And at its most succinct, it's what I was just talking about. The attempt to take old books seriously and to act as if you want to approach a book, especially great books, naively, in the sense that you don't want to assume ahead of time that you know everything and that this old author is just a kind of museum tour of the past. Read it with fresh eyes and read it as if it might have something to teach you. And read every great book to the extent that they're truly great as if the author is smarter than you, because most of them probably are. And I say that for myself too. So we said the Bible, but the classical tradition, Aristotle and Plato. This book I was mentioning, but I didn't give the title to, is called A History of Political Philosophy. The editors are Leo Strauss and Joseph Cropsey. It's just kind of a Cook's tour of the great thinkers. That at least, you don't have to agree with everything that's said in there about the thinkers, but it's a good place to start, and it at least lists probably the greatest authors of the last 2,500 years. That would be a great place to start. But in brief,
just sum it all.
Aristotle, Plato, Cicero, the medievals, Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, some of the great Jewish thinkers, Maimonides, Averroes, Spinoza. I will. I should warn your audience especially. Read them naively, but understand that a lot of the great political philosophers of history made the reasoned decision on the reasoned revelation side of things. So you're not reading them for theological knowledge. You're reading them for their insights about politics and human nature and the temptation or the difficulty of justice, the instability of regimes, and read them. You form your own judgment after you initially read them naively. But then up through the modern times, Hobbes, Locke, Machiavelli, an evil teacher of evil, as Strauss called him on the surface. But in many ways, Machiavelli is a great inflection point in modernity. He's the first guy who really says, Plato, Aristotle, they're great, but they talk about regimes as they ought to be. I'm going to talk to you about what is. That's a great turning point in the history of understanding politics, one in which we're still enthralled to today. And then, one way to start, if you don't want to go way back, just start with the American founders. The library of the American founders is amazing and rich and wonderful. Just, take a read through the Federalist Papers. It's one of the best guides of the American Constitution, if not the best guide ever written, and it holds up well even 250 years later.
Yeah, I think you're right about all the guys that, from a philosophical perspective, got to, a lot of them were atheists, but they reasoned to, okay, well, these are the answers. It's just crazy that they said, oh man, look at all this order, it makes sense, and so obviously it happened by accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just the fact that nature, even in the way that men organize themselves, cries out that there's a creator and that there's order. Mm-hmm. And I love that you said he started the Bible.
Yeah.
Like all of this goes back to the Bible and the foundations of the world.
Yeah. One of Strauss's insights was that, that one of the engines of Western greatness was what he called the tension between reason and revelation. And all he meant by that was you have the sort of secular political philosophy types, and then you have the two claims for the good life. Is it philosophy or is it piety and Christianity? And we'll just, for the sake of simplicity, just leave it at Christianity. Those are the two great claims on the good life. And his point was, under their own premises, neither one could disprove the other. So they were two rival claims, and the tension between them, irresolvable forever, he thought, was a great engine of Western flourishing and greatness, intellectual life, but also political life. And so, it has an analog, I guess, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. It's sort of getting at that, but he was talking more about the kind of life of the mind. But so I would encourage your Christian listeners, and I include myself in that category, to not write off some of the great atheistic thinkers of the past, because they have great insights, even if you don't trust them on theology, which you shouldn't.
Well, I was just talking that's part of like throw stones at your own theology to make it stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Like it will return a stronger conviction if you read people that disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why we've gotten to a place. I was talking to Ron about this earlier because I come from kind of a homeschool background, but this is like 90s homeschool background. And, you know, I was surrounded by a lot of people who very much isolated and insulated themselves from culture and from the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was very a very pious way of looking at things and raising families.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is a lot of those kids that I grew up with totally abandoned their faith in the end.
You can't insulate your children from the wider culture. You can protect them from it, but you have to inoculate them against it, which, you know, like all good vaccines, means introducing a little bit, a guided tour of and a little bit of, and a look at and an understanding of where we are in terms of post-modernity, this fancy word from the sort of political philosophy school. You know, you have to understand it, which means, and you have to understand, I still think it's civically irresponsible, even though I talked about a cold civil war, to call our fellow citizens who disagree with us enemies, and I think it is irresponsible. But you have to know your enemy, know your adversary, politically and philosophically. And to the extent that our two camps have gotten more and more polarized and the divisions have gotten deeper, you have to understand the other side. And, you know, if you look at survey research, the right understands the left a lot better, probably because the left has been so dominant for the last 70 years at least, culturally and intellectually. So it's in a way, you can get away with a lot more on the left because you don't really need to understand the right as much because it's not as dominant. Maybe that's changing, but the right reads the left more than the left reads the right.
What do you think about the divisions on the right?
Yeah, well, they're perennial. Any political coalition is going to have its disagreements. They're interesting. I think my worry about certain strands on the right is a kind of descent into nihilistic power politics at the expense of some tethering to American traditions and even constitutionalism.
Like real vision.
Yeah. So I mean, I alluded to this earlier. I think it's incorrect to say the Constitution is dead. Now, if it really were dead, you know, that opens up some vistas that get you into dangerous territory pretty quickly. And I think the casualness with which a certain section of the right says Constitution, either it was corrupt from the beginning or it's gone. I think that's incorrect. And there are reasons for still fighting the good fight within our institutions. Now, being radical and pushing the envelope and trying to restore, you can never really return in politics, but you can restore and reapply old institutions, create new ones, and reinvigorate the Constitution. I think we're seeing a lot of that in the courts right now, as distracting as all of the obstruction of the Trump administration is. I think, you know, a lot of the right has been pretty effective at placing a certain kind of judge on the bench over the last 30 years. And a lot of them are chipping away at this infrastructure, the Supreme Court included. I mean, you know, we have to recall that Roe v. Wade was overturned after a 40-year struggle. And the Supreme Court is chipping away at the administrative state. I mean, they basically overruled a major precedent. It didn't get much press because it's dorky stuff, but they basically overruled a major precedent from the 1930s that should open up a lot more ability for national political coalitions to begin to get a handle on the administrative state. And if you told some of us that 20 years ago that was going to happen, we would have said, I mean, we hope for it, but not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So there's reasons for hope. But do not place all your trust in the judiciary. I don't want to overplay that hand. There are two other political branches, and unfortunately, we need to break the spell of judicial supremacy, which has been the norm in modern American life, especially in D.C. for many decades.
Dude, Ryan Williams, thanks for coming on the podcast. Is there anything you want to leave with?
Yeah. I encourage everyone to go, check out what we're up to at Claremont.org. And if you don't subscribe, well, look, here's a way to get educated on some stuff. and you can pick and choose and subscribe to the Claremont Review of Books and read The American Mind at americanmind.org. Claremont Review of Books, it comes 4 times a year. Yes, it's like 100 pages, and it's this big thing. But it's a book review, but also essays on politics, history, literature. So it's a nice little, mini graduate education every issue. So,
Well, and you've got a great podcast, by the way.
Thank you.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, go check out the Roundtable. It's really just a news podcast with some of the guys from The American Mind. And we have some guests too, but we try to bring some of the battle of ideas, insights to our current politics, and we succeed sometimes and sometimes just bullshit, but but it's fun. We have fun doing it. I think a lot of our listeners enjoy it. So
Love it. Well, thanks, Ryan. We'll have you back on sometime.
yeah, thanks, Ryan.
All right.
My pleasure.